All right, so today we're diving deep, really deep into the life of Michelle Obama.
Fascinating story, really is.
Yeah, and we're using an episode of the American History Tellers podcast kind of as our guide.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about her story is that she really kind of challenged
Mm.
like what it means to be the first lady.
Right.
We're going to be uncovering how she redefined the role and the impact, she's had both in and out of the White House.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Starting with her early years in Chicago.
Right.
Now, I knew she grew up on the South Side, but the podcast really kind of highlighted how important her family history was in shaping her worldview.
And her family's story is like woven into the larger narrative of the Great Migration.
Oh, wow.
That massive movement of African Americans from the South to the North in the early 1900s.
Right.
Both sides of Michelle's family were part of that,
Wow.
seeking better opportunities and escaping the Jim Crow South.
It's really amazing to think about the courage and resilience, to make that journey. Oh, yeah.
To build new lives in places that often weren't very welcoming.
And Chicago in the 60s was like a city in the middle of social and political upheaval, grappling with segregation, racial inequality, all of that. So that backdrop definitely played a role in shaping Michelle's her strong sense of community and her passion for social justice.
Yeah, I was struck by this story about her high school counselor, I think it was, advising her not to apply to Princeton.
Right. It's like such a stark reminder of the limits people place on others, especially, on young Black women.
Yeah.
But Michelle just defied those expectations.
Yeah.
Not only did she get into Princeton, but she excelled at Harvard Law, too.
Talk about a power move.
Right.
Clearly she was not afraid to challenge the status quo from a very young age.
Absolutely.
But, it's not all academics and breaking barriers.
Right.
Let's talk about how she met Barack.
Yeah, so they're meeting. Not your typical love story.
They first met at this, really prestigious law firm, and Michelle was assigned to be Barack's advisor.
Okay.
Yeah, and apparently she wasn't, immediately impressed. She even turned down his first few romantic advances.
Oh, wow. I can only imagine the dynamic there. She's his mentor, focused on her career, and he's this, charismatic law student.
Right, right.
So what changed?
Well, they shared a passion for social justice.
Okay.
I think that's what really brought them together.
Okay.
They both, they believed in community organizing and they believed in using the law to make positive change.
It's fascinating to see how those early experiences kind of laid the groundwork for their future collaborations. Speaking of collaborations, I was really interested in Michelle's career path. She made a very conscious decision to move from corporate law to public service.
Yeah, that decision says a lot about her values and priorities.
Absolutely.
I mean, she could easily just stay in corporate law, but she wanted a career where she could actually make a real difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And her work with the city of Chicago and then later leading nonprofit organizations really shows that commitment, to public service.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like she was, getting ready for a bigger role on a much bigger stage, even before Barack entered politics.
You're right. You're right.
So let's talk about the transition into politics.
Yeah.
Barack's rise was fast, starting with the Illinois State Senate. So how did Michelle handle that? Because she wasn't really drawn to politics at first.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly smooth sailing. At first, Michelle was, hesitant about his ambitions. She understood the demands of politics, and she didn't want their lives to be consumed by that world.
So she wasn't thrilled when he decided to run for the U.S. Senate in 2004.
She supported him, but she, laid down the law.
Really?
He said if he lost, he was done with politics.
Wow.
It was her way of protecting their family.
That's a smart move.
Making sure they didn't get caught up in this endless cycle of campaigns.
Well, and as we know, he didn't lose.
He did not.
In fact, his 2004 Democratic National Convention speech, it launched him onto the national stage.
Yeah.
And then there was all this talk about a presidential run. So what was Michelle's reaction to that sudden, surge of attention?
It must have been a lot to process. On one hand, she was obviously incredibly proud.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, she probably felt some anxiety about what a presidential campaign would mean for their family, their privacy, their daughters, all of that.
I mean, it's one thing to be a politician's spouse at the state level, but the level of scrutiny that comes with a national campaign, especially for a potential first lady, is just, I mean, it's unreal.
Yeah, and remember, this was when social media was really taking off.
Oh,
So the
yeah.
potential for both good and bad attention
Oh,
was huge.
wow. I can only imagine those conversations they must have had about the impact on, their family, their finances, her own career.
Those conversations were important. Michelle was thinking about the long game. She wanted to make sure they were on the same page about the sacrifices they would have to make, the vision they shared for the future, all of that.
Right.
She wasn't just going along for the ride. She was shaping the path they were going to take together.
Okay, so when Barack announced he was running for president in 2007, Michelle was fully on board,
Yeah.
aware of the challenges, but also ready to play a key role in this historic campaign.
And her role went way beyond what a traditional political spouse would do.
Yeah.
She became a powerful voice in her own right. She connected with voters on a personal level, and she advocated for the things she cared about.
And let's not forget the historical significance.
Of course not.
She was potentially going to become the first African American first lady.
Right.
That role would obviously come with a lot of pressure.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember, the campaign wasn't just about Barack's ambition. It was about their shared vision for a more inclusive America.
Yeah.
And Michelle was a big part of that.
But let's be real, the campaign was brutal.
Oh, yeah.
Michelle faced a level of scrutiny that, I don't think any other political spouse has experienced.
Yeah. Everything she did, every word she said, the clothes she wore, it was all analyzed and often criticized.
Yeah, and a lot of those criticisms had, they had undertones of racism and sexism.
It's a sad reminder of the double standards women face,
Mm.
Especially Black women.
It's exhausting just thinking about it, navigating that kind of scrutiny.
Absolutely.
Did she ever address those criticisms?
Yeah, sometimes, but she picked her battle. She had this really powerful quote book.
Yeah.
She said, when they go low, we go high.
Right.
And that became like a mantra for her and for a lot of people who were just tired of all the negativity.
It's a message of resilience and grace.
Exactly.
But imagine raising kids in the White House.
Oh, wow.
How did she approach parenting amidst all of that chaos and scrutiny?
Michelle was very protective of her daughters, Malia and Sasha, trying to shield them from the media as much as possible, give them a normal childhood.
Right.
There were stories about how she insisted on family dinners, she had curfews, and she encouraged their extracurricular activities.
Right, just like any other parent.
Just like any other parent.
It's amazing juggling all that, being first lady and also just being a mom.
Yes, incredible.
And all of this, of course, was happening while some major things were going on in the world.
Oh, yeah, like you had the economic crisis, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, all those debates about healthcare reform and climate change.
Right. It was a crazy time in American politics.
It was a tumultuous time.
And Michelle was right there with Barack, going through it all.
Absolutely. She was right there by his side.
And then there was the 2012 re-election campaign.
Right.
Just as intense as the first, if not more so.
Mm-hmm.
But amid all of that, the political battles, the constant media attention, there's this moment, I think it was kind of a turning point, the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting.
That shooting, I mean, it was horrific. It shook everyone, and it really affected Michelle deeply.
Yeah.
She said later that it was one of the few times she saw Barack actually need her comfort.
Wow.
And then, a few months later, another tragedy, even closer to home this time.
Right.
The murder of Hadia Fendleton.
Right. A teenage girl from Chicago.
Yeah.
And Hadia's death was just this awful reminder of the gun violence epidemic. That's something Michelle had become more and more vocal about. She went to Hadia's funeral.
She did.
And she talked about the need for change, the need to protect kids and communities from gun violence.
Right. It was a very raw, emotional moment.
Yeah.
It seemed to really strengthen her commitment to using her platform to fight for change.
And that seems to mark a shift in her approach. She became more outspoken on things she cared about, like gun violence, racial inequality, and the importance of education.
Yeah, you can see a difference in how she talked about those issues.
Yeah.
She, fully embraced social media. She gave interviews to all kinds of outlets, not just the traditional ones. And she really tried to connect with people in a more direct way.
It's like she was stepping outside the traditional first lady role.
Yes.
And becoming, a more powerful voice on her own.
She wasn't just a supportive wife anymore. She was a leader, a role model, and an advocate.
Right.
And by the time Barack's second term was ending, it was clear Michelle Obama had left her mark.
Her approval ratings were through the roof.
Oh, yeah.
People really admired her for her grace, her intelligence, and her commitment to making the world a better place.
Absolutely.
But that's not the end of the story.
No, it's really just the beginning.
Okay, so they're in the White House now.
Mm-hmm.
And Michelle takes on this role of First Lady.
Yeah.
It's a position with, I mean, so much history, but no real, like, guidebook, you know?
Right.
So I'm curious, how did she approach defining it for herself?
Well, I think she was very aware of the legacy she was stepping into, but she wasn't like bound by it.
Right.
She took inspiration from past first ladies, but she really wanted to create her own path.
Okay.
One that reflected her own, values and passions.
I mean, she made some interesting choices right off the bat, like planting that vegetable garden on the White House lawn.
Oh, yeah.
What was the thinking behind that?
I think that garden was brilliant, really.
Yeah.
On so many levels.
Yeah.
It was about healthy eating, for sure.
Right.
Which was a big part of her platform, but it was also symbolic. It was about connecting with the land, with the community.
Mm-hmm.
And they even donated some of the produce to local food banks.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah, it was very practical, too.
I remember seeing those pictures of her out there working in the garden with, like, school children. It felt very down to earth, very relatable, which is like a total contrast to that, kind of formal image of the White House.
Exactly. It made the first family seem more human, more accessible to everyday Americans.
And beyond the symbolism, I mean, she launched some pretty substantial initiatives.
You did. Let's Move comes to mind.
Right, focusing on childhood obesity.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a response to anything specific?
She was really worried about the rising rates of childhood obesity.
Yeah.
And what that meant for the country's health in the long term.
Okay.
So Let's Move involved working with schools, communities, even food companies.
Right.
To promote healthier eating and more physical activity for kids.
So it wasn't just about raising awareness. It was about actually changing things.
Absolutely. Systemic change.
Yeah. And that seems to fit with her background in community organizing and her work with nonprofits.
Absolutely. And it's important to note that she didn't just focus on domestic issues.
Oh, right.
I mean, take Joining Forces, for example. That was a huge project.
Yeah.
All about supporting military families and veterans.
Mm-hmm. Right. And she talked a lot about the sacrifices those families make.
She did.
And how important it is to give them the support and resources they need.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of disheartening that even with all these accomplishments, the criticism never really stopped.
Sadly, you're right. The attacks often got really personal.
Yeah.
About her appearance, her clothes, even like her facial expressions.
Oh, remember when she was criticized for wearing that sleeveless dress?
Oh, yeah, during a televised address.
Yeah.
Remember that.
And then there was that whole terrorist fist bump thing.
Oh, God.
Where, like, a totally normal greeting between her and Barack was, like, twisted into something sinister.
Yeah, by some media outlets.
It shows the impossible standards that are often placed on women, especially, Black women in the public eye.
Absolutely.
It's exhausting to even think about trying to deal with that level of scrutiny.
It is.
Did she ever, like, directly address any of it?
Sometimes, yeah, she would, but she was strategic about it.
Mm-hmm.
There's this really great quote from her. She said, "When they go low, we go high."
Right.
And it really became like a motto for her.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people who were just tired of all the negativity.
It's a message of, not just resilience, but grace, too.
It is.
But let's switch gears for a second.
Yeah.
Imagine raising kids in the White House.
Oh, my gosh. I can't even imagine.
Right. How did she, like, balance being a parent with all of, the chaos and the scrutiny?
She was really focused on protecting her daughters, Malia and Sasha.
Yeah.
Trying to, keep them out of the spotlight as much as possible,
Mm-hmm.
give them a normal life as much as they could.
Yeah.
She made sure they had family dinners. She had curfews for them.
Right.
Encouraged them to do their extracurricular activities.
Yeah.
Just like any other parent would.
It's amazing to think about, like, juggling those two roles, First Lady and just mom.
It's incredible.
And on top of all that, there were some pretty major things happening in the world at the same time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you had the economic crisis, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan,
right.
The debates about healthcare, climate change.
Yeah, it was a pretty tumultuous time in American politics.
It was.
And Michelle was She was right there with Barack through all of it.
She was.
And then there was the 2012 re-election campaign.
Right. Just as intense, if not more so.
If not more so.
Than the first.
Yeah. But in the middle of all of that, the political battles, the media frenzy, there's this one moment that really stands out as a turning point for her, I think.
What's that?
The Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting.
Oh, yeah.
That shooting was horrific.
It was.
It shook the entire country, and it really affected Michelle.
It did. She even said later that it was one of the few times she saw Barack really need her support.
Wow.
And then just a few months later, another tragedy. This one hit closer to home.
Right.
The murder of Hadiyah Pendleton.
Right. That teenage girl from Chicago.
Yeah. And Hadiyah's death was just this stark reminder of the gun violence epidemic.
Yeah.
And, that was an issue Michelle was becoming more and more vocal about.
Yeah.
She went to Hadiyah's funeral.
She did.
And she spoke about the need for change.
Yeah.
The need to protect kids, protect communities from this violence. It was a really emotional moment for her.
Yeah.
And it seemed to really solidify her commitment to using her position to fight for change.
And from then on, you can really see a shift in her approach.
Yeah.
She became more outspoken, more direct about the things she cared about. Gun violence, racial inequality, the importance of education.
You can see a change in how she communicated.
Yeah.
She really embraced social media. She gave interviews to all kinds of outlets, not just the typical ones.
Yeah.
And she really made an effort to connect with people in a more authentic way.
It's like she was stepping outside of the traditional first lady role. Becoming, a more powerful voice in her own right.
She wasn't just, the supportive wife anymore.
Yeah.
She was a leader, a role model, an advocate.
Yeah.
And by the end of Barack's second term, it was obvious that Michelle Obama had really made her mark.
I mean, her approval ratings were sky high.
They were.
People admired her for her grace, her intelligence, her commitment to, making the world a better place.
Absolutely.
But the story doesn't end there.
No, it doesn't.
So we've talked about her Chicago roots, her time as First Lady, but you said it, her story didn't end when they left the White House.
It really didn't. She could have easily just stepped back, taken a break.
Right.
But that's just not Michelle Obama.
Yeah. Yeah.
She kept going, kept using her platform to advocate for the things she cares about.
Right, and reaching even more and her memoir Becoming, that was a huge success.
It was, broke all kinds of records.
Yeah, and it really resonated with people all over the world. What do you think it was about that book that made such an impact?
I think it was more than just a book tour. It was like a movement. She was connecting with people on a personal level.
Right.
Sharing her own story, the good and the bad, and inspiring others to do the same.
Yeah.
It was about more than just being First Lady. It was about being human.
Yeah, and that goes back to what we've been talking about, her ability to connect with people authentically, no matter who they are, what they believe.
Exactly.
And then there's the Girls Opportunity Alliance.
Right. Building on the work she started with, Let Girls Learn.
Yeah.
Focusing on empowering girls through education, breaking down the barriers that keep them from reaching their full potential.
And her work on voter participation is so important too.
Oh, absolutely, especially among young people and marginalized communities.
When we all vote has really made a difference.
It has. It's about getting people involved, making sure everyone has a voice.
And she's not afraid to speak out on issues like social justice, racial equality.
No, she's not.
The need for more diversity everywhere. She's become this cultural icon.
She has.
Someone who goes beyond political labels. And she inspires people of all ages.
She does.
It's pretty remarkable.
It is.
It makes you think about, what it is about her that connects with people so strongly.
I think it's a lot of things.
Yeah.
She's authentic, she's intelligent, she's funny, she's resilient. It's a powerful combination, and she uses it to lift others up.
Yeah.
To make real change.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening.
It has.
We've explored Michelle Obama's life, not just as First Lady, but as a woman who's always defied expectations and used her platform to make a difference.
Her journey is it's a testament to hard work, determination, and staying true to yourself.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference, no matter how big or small.
So as we wrap up here, what's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think Michelle Obama's story is an invitation.
Okay.
It's an invitation to think about our own values, to find our voices,
Yeah, yeah.
and to use whatever platform we have to make the world a better place.
That's a perfect way to put it.
She's shown us what's possible when we combine passion, purpose, and a willingness to break down barriers.
Yeah, Michelle Obama's story is one that I think will keep inspiring us for a long time to come.
I agree.